Hello and welcome. Thank you very much for joining. I'm Julieta Aranda. I'm the organizer of the Conversations program in Art Basel this year, and it's a pleasure to introduce this topic. This is the second talk we are doing on the topic of ecology and the ecological impact of art world and art world practices. So this talk is, let's talk about the weather. Sorry. In recent years, more and more artists and institutions are using their platforms to address environmental issues. Ocean pollution, climate change, the melting of the polar ice caps. But is this increasing interest only a trend? Or is it possible for artists and their artworks, as well as institutions and their programs, to have a positive impact on our relationship with nature? This panel involves artists and institutional figures whose focus lies on ecology, asking them to elaborate on the relationship to the subject matter and on the ability of their work to improve our planet's condition. The panel will be moderated by Antonia Lampi, who is curator and artistic director of Savi in Berlin, and many, many more things, but I won't go into deep introductions. Then we have Maria Theresa Alves, an artist based in Sao Paulo and Berlin. Pedro Neves Marques, who is an artist, filmmaker, writer, and many more things, based in New York City, originally from Portugal. Kate MacGarry, founder of Kate MacGarry Gallery, based in London. And Markus Reymann, co-founder of TVA 21 Academy in Vienna. And you take it from here.
Thank you. Is it working? Yeah, now. Thank you so much, Julieta, for this invitation, and also to Annelie Graaf, actually, for taking great care of us. So I think that what we decided, let's say, together with the speakers, while, let's say, the sort of choreography of the panel will really move from looking into how much artists, galleries, or organizations have been actually focusing on environmental questions and climate crisis actually for quite some time, and hence maybe testify through their work already how it's not about a trend or a temporary or transitional question, but it's really a question of long-term engagement that has been ongoing in certain cases for decades, to looking into really what type of protocols or policies, one could actually think about by using also the kind of privileged space that the art world has in many cases to support, engage with, and with communities or cases directly, so to speak. So what can the art world actually offer on the one hand, but also what new practices could be at least proposed in order to think about more sustainable ways of acting as well. We'll go into that deeper in the conversation. I've also asked every speaker to actually give more or less a 5-minute presentation of themselves and a few projects that I think give you at least a sense of where they're speaking from. So we'll start with Maria Theresa Alves. Thank you so much for joining the panel.
Hi. All right. I'm using my 5 minutes to talk about some people, well, let themselves talk about what they're thinking. In 2017, I went to the state of Acre in Brazil. If you look at the map, it would be on the left side. And I met with people from AMIACI, which is the Association of the Movement of Indigenous Agroforest Workers, Agents of the state of Acre. And I interviewed 34 people and asked what they were doing and what do they think it was important to talk about in their work as agroforest agents. The installation, it was a video installation. It's called To See the Forest Standing, and you can see it on my website. I'm not going to talk about my stuff. I have a great website, so I'll talk about these people. This is Nawa Sharu and Poa Katukina from the Nupikin people. As you can see, he's the president. He was just elected. He was, at this photograph, he was elected that day, president of the Association of the Movement of Indigenous agroforest worker agents of the state of Acre. So I read a little bit of his interview. My land and my people are affected directly and indirectly by the highway that has an 18-kilometer stretch cutting through our lands. This has brought many serious problems to the people that live there. The asphalting of the highway also had a serious impact on us. Even so, we are still working according to our culture, tradition, and beliefs. Before the federal constitution and land demarcation, before that, we used to migrate from river to river. Whenever game or fish became scarce, we would simply go to a different river or a different place. Now we are living in a defined space with officialized and controlled borders, and we cannot leave this space. It is a small piece of land we have, but we protect this land. Although the highway has invaded our land, anyone leaving the city will see that the forests are standing, and only within demarcated indigenous lands. Before arriving to indigenous land, all you will see is cattle and pasture, and then you arrive and see the forest. We protect the forest, and we don't do it just for ourselves. We do it for the municipality, for the state, for Brazil, and for the world. Where is it that you can find up to 87% of preserved forests? Inside indigenous lands. And we want to keep our forests standing and make them larger. The world is getting more worried about climate. There's much concern about climate change. The people, the white people, they began to worry not so long ago. We've been thinking about it for thousands of years. Until today, we take care of the forest to keep the forest standing so that we can breathe and live healthily. So we work more each day to protect, to preserve the biodiversity inside indigenous lands. And that is why we are doing our jobs as agroforestry agents. Amiaki has been working inside indigenous lands since 1996. They are building more branch roads by the main highways around indigenous lands. We are being surrounded by white people, by ranchers, and we are getting worried. We, the Nupikin, are worried that these neighbors might just come in and cut down the trees and around our land. We don't want that. We think differently. This is Yaka from the Shadawa people. We know we have a different view of sustainability. Agribusiness has its view, which is pesticides, exploitation of the forest, and we have a different way of thinking about sustainability. By keeping the forest standing, preserving traditional knowledge, living well with good water, good air to breathe, and bathing for women and children. We have many forests in the Amazon. With the new law, they can come into indigenous lands, make roads inside railroads, They can make railroads, and with this comes the hindering of children's social lives, of children, of women, abuse, even rape of indigenous women. Quite often, there has been a lot of fear from us of these menaces of the great enterprises which can reach the indigenous lands. The land for us is like a mother. A mother is someone you take care of. A mother is someone you do not trade for anything. So the land is like this for us. Buzan, Hunikuin people, I am working for life now. It is life that gives life, that enriches life. So all of these are life, and they come from life. We have built this. It's an area that has been totally destroyed by cattle farming. Any greens that you see there was planted by the agroforest agents. They have made the forest come back tree by tree. I want to give my talk here because everything here is important to me. Biodiversity is very important in our lives today, isn't it? So when I'm in the middle of the forest, I'm fine. I'm at home. I am with my components that are the beings. There's a lot of life here. This is where we feed ourselves and also where we reforest to give fresh air, to help other countries, to help other places where there isn't this forest. So when we plant a tree here, it will benefit the whole world. We hope that the government acknowledges us and collaborates and helps, that the whole country contributes to our knowledge of us, the Hunikuin people, and assist us. Yawakashu. The destruction of the forest was in the time of our forefathers, the time of the seringueiros, the rubber trapper, the bosses. At that time, we were forced to work for the bosses so we would have food to eat. And we were forced to speak Portuguese because they would not allow us to speak our language. And then they cleared much of the forest for cattle, for large plantations, and they did not use the land more than once. They just used it once, and it was over. That land which they had used, they just left it. So this is something terrible for us, and we are trying to redo this, to recover the forest, to reforest. When he then went to plant this, he plants it manually with an instrument, a tool that you have to pound into the earth. To make the hole enough for this plant takes about 20 poundings, to get into the earth. He does that for free, okay? Buzan, Shananawa. In the past, there were many correrias, runnings, where the Indians were massacred. That was when the white people came to indigenous areas and would start to massacre the Indians, to kill. The white people killed the husbands and took the wives away. My grandfather took a few families away from all of that. There were 7 Shananawa people left at that time. Now we are 900. My grandfather is a great warrior. I am his grandson. We have been working in reforestation and the conservation of nature. And today we reforest. We deserve to be acknowledged for this work, since we are the only people that protect the land and fight for it. It is where our blood has been spilled. We have done much to achieve this, and today we are reforesting. Yube, Hunikui. There's a large part of society that still sees the Amazon forest as an opportunity for making money. They are greedy for iron ore, timber, cattle, soy, crude oil, and hydroelectric dams. It is really bad for us. Unfortunately, those in charge of Brazil, those who would be our caciques, our chiefs, unfortunately, in the eyes of these caciques, the forest is an opportunity to make money. That is bad for us and for humanity. We do not have indigenous land where timber is being exploited here in Acre. There is no pasture that is currently leased to ranchers here in Acre. We don't have any leased soy crops within our indigenous land here in Acre. But the power of the system is too cruel. But we have survived thus far. We will keep on surviving and looking for more people to help us. Kaku, Katukina people. I am the pajé, the healer of my people, and cacique, chief of my village. The federal road cuts our indigenous land from one side to the other. Our land, the Katukina land, is surrounded by listen to this, the National Institute for Colonization, we're in the 21st century, right? For colonization and agrarian reform, which has enclosures all around our land. The extravagant reserves is on the other side. And then there is a small road seizing our lands. People come in to hunt on our land and to take our animals from inside. They take our fish from inside. Today we're trying to calm down the invasions a little bit here on our land. We are always discussing with our neighbors, with the people that live by the small roads. This is our place. It is forever. Land forever and people forever. I can't change it. It can't change with another piece of land. This is ours, ours. The government wants to reduce, to end the indigenous land, to end the land. And today we can see, our parliamentarians created a law to end the indigenous lands in Brazil. How can it be? Why are these parliamentarians making a law to destroy the indigenous people, our land, to end our land, taking the wood from indigenous people, killing indigenous people, suffering like in the times of captivity? We have been through that time. Today we live in peace. They come with a document creating a new kind of law to end the indigenous people, to take our land. This is what worries me as Pajé Kaku. This is what worries me. How are we going to be alive? How are we going to live that time which we lived in captivity? Are we going to live that way again? That worries me. And now the last interview. Masha Hunikui. We know that today temperatures are rising. Why? because of deforestation. If you go to any village today, you breathe fresh air. You are comfortable, and that is why the indigenous population needs to be supported. We ask so much to be supported. We can be more secure on our lands so that we can work with peace together with our families, with our people, to benefit not only those who live within the forest, but those in the country of Brazil and in foreign countries. We ask the people to support us so that we are not left alone, okay? This interview has affected me since 2017. The situation in Brazil has gotten much worse with the new election with the president. Deliberate situations against indigenous people are happening all the time. These people, there was just a few of these that I have shown from the interview, they are on the front line that allows us to breathe, okay? They must keep the forest standing. They educate the non-indigenous settlers about the environment. They do this for free. They must negotiate with politicians to maintain their land. To do that, they have to take an airplane to Brasilia to do that. They have to fundraise for each penny to raise the money to get on that airplane, to go negotiate for land that is theirs, okay? They must face loggers, illegal gold miners, and the powerful agricultural lobby. They receive no support on the government. Instead, the government intimidates and threatens them. All of these people, there are 34 of them, are our agricultural agents. They are responsible for keeping track of everything on the land. So how many trees can be cut for making a house? Which trees are going to be needed to be replanted? The area for crops, how much area has to be left alone so animals can be there by themselves. This is all done by these agroforest agents. They receive no money. They also work their lands, because that's where they live from, okay? And in between all of this, to make a little money, to get the bus ticket to be able to go for more training, they gather seeds like this, and they make these necklaces, and then they try to sell them in towns that wishes that they were dead, okay? They have asked for support, and I don't know how to do this. I really don't. I have bought jewelry and tried to sell it. I haven't been unsuccessful. But we're here to have a talk about protocols. So these people I introduced to you so that they can be part of this protocol discussion. Thank you.
Should I go ahead? Or, okay. Hi, thanks. Thanks, Julieta. So let me just see if in my works in films, I guess only slightly there's like climate spelled out like in big letters. But my approach has been climate is let's say climate is not the crisis. Climate is an expression of the crisis, an economical crisis, a crisis of capital. And the way I've been navigating through my films and writings some of these issues, perhaps to look much more at the entanglements of climate with, let's say, with land, with extraction, with toxicity, displacement, gender and reproduction, for example. So I'll just very quickly run through some of my films, and I'm more interested in the discussion we might have. So just to think, for example, in this case, this is a poem about mosquitoes and the way mosquitoes, certain animals, because of climate change, they are in places they should not be in, which is the case of this specific mosquito this poem and other works of mine talk about in Brazil, where I work a lot. So in this case, for example, by tracing this displacement of a specific insect into a different habitat because of global warming, I hope the film shows how climate change is actually entangled, for example, with images of technology and futurity and contamination and containment. This is a film that's my most recent work, and it's taking place during the Brazilian crisis right now, or leading up to the election of Bolsonaro, and really kind of looking also at the denialism, let's say, about environmental issues through a specific image of an animal. And again, in this case, if the mosquito can kill, it cannot be born. This is a sentence that was circulating in Brazil when the Zika epidemic was at its peak, and there was all of this militaristic kind of language against a specific animal in the epidemic, and how that reflected a lot of what was happening on the ground with militarization of the mind, let's say, of people, and this confluence as well of who has the right to exist at a specific moment. And I'll skip through this, actually. Again, this is another half an hour kind of short film, which starts in Rio de Janeiro, and as in other works, taking a fictional approach and storytelling to really look at, in this case, trying to map the industries and the extractivism in Brazil, being a country that's been always ruled by extractivist economies ever since the beginning of colonization. And in this case, looking at Petrobras and all of the oil production in Brazil, and leading up to the interior. And as Maria was saying, how you travel in the inner states of Brazil and in the north of Brazil, and you see the change in the landscape. So for like soy plantations, palm, corn, etc. So again, both these issues of who has the right to the land, how is the land managed, and again, contamination. In this case, just as in the previous one, most of the land is genetically modified. In the mosquitoes as well, the mosquitoes are genetically modified. So again, perspectives on how also kind of, I guess, how climate change demands us questions of technology as well, of resilience, and who owns, and even more importantly as well, who imagines those technologies. Here as well, we were shooting in another big oil facility in Brazil. This is a shorter film where, again, it's just taking from notes and meeting people, both indigenous and farmers in the interior, and just having discussions about property of seeds, of displacement, and the economic monopoly of the plants themselves, actually. And in this case, again, I was working with a good friend and actress, and that was with me throughout this travel. And the way we were having these discussions, also with farmers, about reproduction, for example, who controls the reproduction of the seeds, etc. Thinking that also many of the farmers are stuck with just one company that they can buy from and sell to. So that was an interesting and difficult conversation to have. This is also a still from a more essayistic-like, although fictional film, which both talks again to the patenting and control, genetic manipulation of plants, but really tracing also, again, these new technologies to long-standing uses of technology throughout colonization and the control of plants and land. And again, reproduction. And the film also in its own way speaks to this, I would say dystopian, some people will say utopian, escape plans from the planet, from planet Earth towards like other twin planet Earth somewhere out there in the galaxy. So having a more of a sci-fi-ish approach to the storytelling part. This is the last thing I maybe want to show, and Inhabitants is a collaborative project I have with another artist, Mariana Silva, and that Markus knows very well as well. And here in this case, we produce films, short films online. And in here, yes, it is the case where we have worked on climate change absolutely head-on, both in terms of, again, of technologies, geoengineering, technologies to control the weather, and who owns that, owns those technologies. In that case, again, it's a very tight group of people that are investing in those technologies, and even, ironically, some climate denialist groups, like the Heartland Institute in the US, who, although is a climate denialist group, is already investing in geoengineering technologies. So just really, in a journalistic way, looking at those loopholes. And of course, we also worked on the Anthropocene at some point with House of World Cultures in Berlin. So this is the one that's been more obviously like tackling the climate change issue. Just to finalize, I think, yes, to me, it's important to not think about the climate as weather and even like global warming, but as a very complex historical entanglement of bodies and histories and perspectives on what both land and climate is. And I think indigenous people and cultures in Brazil, to me, were really key for me to go through that process as well. And something that needs to be part of the discussion. And then I hope we talk more in the conversation.
Should I go? I'm next. I don't know, can we run this in a way that it just runs instead of me having to click? Is that possible? Yes. Yeah, I think that's, well, it was a good start. Good, there we are. Hello, my name is Markus Reymann. I'm the director of TBA 21 Academy, co-founder, as it was introduced. And I think when Julieta said institutional figures, she might have meant me. I'm not sure. But anyway, so I found myself in 2011 in an organization, Thyssen-Born Mr. Art Contemporary, that has a foundation and a collection with the public programming, and this public programming focused a lot on commissioning large-scale, unconventional, genre-spanning works. And after nearly 10 years of practicing this, we decided to initiate a project that was focused on the environment, entirely on the environment, with a special focus on the oceans. And we embarked on, we were very lucky to get our hands on this boat. It's a 39-meter explorer vessel called the Dardanella, and we embarked on its maiden voyage circumnavigating Iceland with an artist that is amongst us today. It's Jana Winderen and Chris Watson, and we wanted to explore the oceans through the lens of art, through the eyes of artists, under the guidance of artists, but to give these artists and our participants as much information as possible, we also invited scientists, we invited environmentalists, we invited lawyers at some point, then we invited indigenous leadership to facilitate a space of an immersive experience into the oceanic, to really start working from there. And what we realized really, really quickly, especially after going out with scientists, is that we knew nothing about the oceans. We didn't know anything about the oceans as practitioners, as individuals, but also collectively as a species. We know very little about the oceans. Scientifically, they say 5% of the oceans are explored. You can see when you look at the ocean science, ocean research, it comes straight, it's a straight line from the military-industrial complex, and understanding that only 5% is kind of taxonomized organized like that, gave us a nice opening to really think, okay, how can we elaborate, how can we expand, how can we really stretch this idea of what is research, right? And we put the artists at the center of these journeys and started working from there. But with this understanding of knowing nothing, we needed to ask ourselves as practitioners, and me as kind of leading this project, how do we want to react to this, right? And so we started seriously looking into conservation. We started seriously looking into the complex of academia and science. We started looking into policy making. We initiated 3 conservation projects, of one we're still indirectly running, by me being the chair of the board of the Alligator Head Foundation, which is a sister foundation that we created in Jamaica to manage and program a 6 square kilometer piece of the ocean, which is now protected. But this comes with a certain set of questions for 24 fishermen that can't go fishing there anymore. It's a question of alternative livelihoods and. We inscribed ourselves then in the policy-making process because we understood that grassroots conservation bottom-up is has one speed. Can we get ahead of an environmental disaster instead of always cleaning up the mess afterwards? We found this very obscure United Nations body called the International Seabed Authority, which you know intimately now, which is tasked with the administration and distributions of the resources on the seabed, which means this is an environmental disaster waiting to happen. No one knows about this, right? And so we thought, okay, by inserting ourselves into this process, can we actually move something in there? And we've become the first and only art organization ever to be granted an observer status, which means we sit right next to the United States. They are not part of the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Seas, Greenpeace, and so on. And the question is, what can art do when it's in there, right? So that's and only then we mounted our first exhibition. The first exhibition that we ever produced was a work of 40 unique pieces. You saw it in the slides. It's in a silver box dug away on an island in Costa Rica, Cocos Island. 40 unique works by Marina Abramovitz, Olafur Eliasson, Doug Aitken, Ed Rouchet, and many others gave us unique works. We buried them on the archetype of all treasure islands, which is Cocos Island, and through a long, elaborate, performative craziness that ended up with 2 other objects that we then brought to an auction in New York, which is now the treasure map. We raised the funds to actually start, initiate, and now run a conservation project for the pelagic species on and around this island. This has been kind of a long journey of public programming all around the world. And at some point, there was the time to actually bring it all together. And this is what you see here. We were very lucky at some point to get our hands on to a abandoned church in Venice. It's the Chiesa di San Lorenzo. It was closed to the public for 125 years. It also happens to be the largest singular volume in Venice. There's no space that's bigger in the Arsenale or in the Doge's Palace. It's mainly due to his height, ceiling height of 26 meters. So it's really a breathtaking space, and we have this now for 9 years. We're the stewards of it for 9 years, and it's called the Ocean Space. It's we opened it with Joan Jonas, which is like the result of a 3-year long-term research commission, which we've embarked on. So it's the kind of the methodology that we've created is really one of collaboration, one of integration, one of time. Right? It's it's about process and not object somehow, and really it started with a very simple question or naive question in times of massive transformations that seem to be more and more scary to politics and society. Can we allow ourselves to actually think about and think from and through a system that is constantly in change, constantly moving, which is the ocean? And if we allow ourselves to think from there, what does that mean to our actions? This meant that we needed to stretch kind of the understanding, at least the board's understanding of what is art, because that's the mission of the foundation for the arts and the furthering of the arts. So it's sometimes hard to explain why and what this still has to do with art. but I think it's only possible through the process of making art. It has become an extremely powerful process for us to think this with artists and the kind of collaborative nature that this process brings with it.
This is a really big subject to navigate, but I'm happy to be talking about it and be part of this discussion today. The crisis that's being revealed to us by scientists and by visible changes in the weather is very frightening. We've known about this looming issue for some time, but the protests of Extinction Rebellion and the school strike led by Greta Thunberg have really woken me up this year. It's not rocket science to work out that our current way of working is not sustainable and we need to make changes. I have a gallery, so I'm lucky enough to express some of my angst and share artists' work on this subject through the exhibitions that we host. I guess that's why I've been included here today. In the last few years, the environment, extinction, a post-human world, natural and man-made disasters have cropped up in artists' work and several exhibitions at the gallery. One exhibition in particular by Markus in March this year tackled the subject head-on with sculptures marking the extinction of various species. The show also included a nature calendar that relayed the live and often unnoticed movements of animals and insects. It was a beautiful and moving work. I do believe that art has an important role to play in delivering messages about climate change and to help navigate the psychological impact. But what we really need to do is look at the cost of our activity. I guess Art Basel really is one of the largest gatherings of our clan, known as the art world. It's become the norm to travel and see art all over the globe. Art fairs and biennales are prolific. So how can we start to measure the cost on the environment and make changes to our behavior? Over the past 20 years, some of our favorite art institutions have been sponsored by BP and Shell, no doubt enabling them to provide free exhibitions and champion artists. It seems we've been living in an age of ethical apathy, and this is now changing, with protests bringing an end to many sponsorship deals. In a more progressive political climate, we might be feeling more confident that our governments will act swiftly to make radical change to industry and energy production. Since they are not, it falls on us as individuals to activate change. On Tuesday, however, the UK government did make a pledge to cut emissions to zero, calling it net zero by 2050. Although this is a step in the right direction and it is commended, many environmentalists are saying that this is not feasible and it has come too late. It's been said that the wealthier you are, generally the larger your carbon footprint will be. So we are certainly in the right place to be having this discussion. And when I say wealthy, that includes me and everyone in this room. Climate change will continue to have the biggest impact on economically developing countries, so surely the developed world has the biggest responsibility to reduce carbon emissions. We're being told, reduce your carbon footprint, eat less meat, refuse one-use plastics, buy natural, sustainable materials, buy local, travel less, drive electric cars, take the train, not the plane, buy fair trade, ethical products, and if you can afford it, plant trees and plant as many as you can. The question for me is, what can I do as an individual and what can I do as a gallerist to make my business more sustainable? The first things I can focus on are waste, I guess, packaging, shipping, travel. I recently met an artist in the UK called Tom Gallant, who's made a decision to switch from his art practice to carry out environmental research. He's introduced me to a dynamic set of new companies who are pioneering incredible new materials using mycelium. Mycelium is a vegetative part of a fungus which eats carbon and keeps it underground on the forest floor. It's basically mushroom technology. One company is Crown in the Netherlands, who have developed mushroom packaging, high-performance materials that can replace MDF, polystyrene, and are 100% compostable. They're not my image. Oh, yes, they are. Where am I? Another is Ecovative Design, just outside New York. Amongst other things, they make fabric for the fashion industry, fully compostable trainers, for example, and mycelium leather that can be grown in just 9 days, as opposed to rearing cattle for years. Yesterday, I believe here there was a talk on the carbon footprint, and Rockbox, a new UK-based company formed by Artworld technicians and shippers, presented their high-performance reusable crate that can adapt in size and doesn't require any extra packaging. How can we give a wider platform to the companies researching and producing sustainable materials for our industry? Could Art Basel host something during the fairs to share information with our collectors, our gallery colleagues, the shipping companies? Maybe this could be the next step after discussions this week at Art Basel. And it would be nice to see the Art Basel partners, BMW, only showcasing the i3, their electric vehicles, rather than 4x4s for the VIPs. Let's champion more environmental roles in institutions. The Serpentine, for example, has a curator of general ecology, Lucia Pietrusti, who curated the celebrated Lithuanian pavilion in Venice this year. And there are art foundations already doing great work. TBA 21 Academy, who've just heard from, with Ocean Space. Atelier Luma in the south of France, part of the Luma Foundation, have a workshop for developing sustainable materials. And actually, Francois Pinault is apparently making moves to improve the footprint of Kering, his fashion brand, under pressure from Macron. They have a target to change, but it's clear that there's a very long way to go, as they only recently banned high fashion corporations from destroying unsold garments. Let's hope more art world players take on these issues. I think the biggest challenge for me to tackle personally is travel. We're so used to getting on airplanes to do what we do, and this is the one we don't want to talk about. I have to admit, I flew to Basel on Sunday, and I had great remorse when they announced the flight was 1 hour, 15 minutes. Why didn't I take the train? I took the train to Hanover a couple of weeks ago for an opening. It took 8 hours each way, but it was enjoyable, and I got some work done. I hate flying, so I arrived in a less crumpled human being. I have read we can make a big impact with other changes to our lifestyle, but not with flying. Batteries for aeroplanes are years away, and they're too heavy. I like to travel and I like to sell art in faraway places, but we have to reduce this. Flight shame is growing momentum, and I've got it.
Can I ask you, now it's really time to thank you so much, all of you, for these presentations. And well, I want to share with you the fact that we had been starting to actually discuss the sort of different subjects that we wanted to address during this moment. And I think that you have been touching upon a different array of points that we were that we sort of agreed on going through, because it's a very, very dense topic, actually, to disentangle in a way. And maybe I just want to say a few things before also opening to the audience, so that we actually get questions, not just at the end. And one is that we were discussing how also when we talk about climate crisis or let's say abuse towards the environment, we're also looking at one, particular also culture that kind of has produced that. We could talk about modernism, we could talk about capitalism, but a culture that already maybe more or less in the 1400s has started to sort of draw a line between civilization and nature. And nature at this point is something understood as something to be abused, exploited, disposed of, without any kind of limits, more or less, as long as it would serve this sort of human civilization purpose. And this is a particular European project. And I think that sometimes when I also hear these discussions, and we obviously wanted to also contextualize it in the fact that we are in Basel and in Basel Art Fair right now, is also the question of, the colonizers or the former colonizers are also now trying to find a solution to a lot of abuse that has been produced throughout the years. Now, it's not to point fingers, but it's also to think, and this is something that I also wanted to engage with the speakers with, about what other type of cultures we could and should look at, what other references we should actually take into consideration, because so many cultures out there have not had such an exploitative relationship with the environment. Hence, instead of just thinking that we need to reinvent the wheel, we could also look at, what forms of coexistence there are already and have been there already for centuries to come. In a way, I think that's probably also what Maria Teresa Alves was sort of pointing at, in terms of so many communities and groups that have formed precisely to safeguard, preserve types of, parts of the planet that have been and continue to be abused and exploited. I'd like just to run these questions through you before passing it up, to the audience.
I think the easiest thing, if anybody's further interested, is just get in touch with Amiaki. Invite the agroforest agents to give a talk in your community. You know, they're experts in what they're doing. They're very committed, and they don't have a voice that's out there in the world.
But maybe also if I can respond just quickly to this, because in a way, the question is also, what can the space of art actually really do? I mean, on the one hand, there's the idea towards this community, for example. On the one hand, it's obviously fundraising, as you were highlighting very much, economics, like provide actually liquidity in order for them to do their work. But do you imagine, I mean, so this in a way is at the core. Do you imagine something else? Because in a way, if I then connect to what Markus instead was saying, it's also about the visionary potential that the space of art, having also lost, you know, disciplinary boundaries, etc., can also offer. And I guess there is also, I wonder whether it's different positions or there is a space in between.
I think it's too early for us to already start breaking up into groups that hate each other forever.
Oh, exactly.
We're trying to figure out how to not do that for at least 10 minutes. Shall we agree on that? Yes, there are different ways of looking at the situation of the forest, that it is a daily reality that is of beings. It's always beings there, you know. And in the West, Europe used to have this situation, used to have a relationship of beings with the forest, and basically, the Catholic Church was very helpful in destruction of that idea of being, that a human was just a being like another being. And since that has happened, the Americas has come under that situation. And then comes this category of nature. And then comes this category of civilization. And this has become very tragic in developing any discourse.
I think it's actually one space, right? I think it's one space, and I think the potential of artists, or the kind of the societal role that artists are being given, makes it possible to take societal rights, like in the Amazon, where a lot of things are dreamt seriously, right? Which for others, when you come from other Western society, this is not a real form of engagement. This is dreaming. This is sleeping. This is dreaming. This is not real, right? So this cannot be the basis of a conversation, and if it can be a basis of a conversation, cannot be the beginning of a project, right? I was very lucky that I was able to spend some time with Ernesto Neto and the Huni Queen and do something with them, and just by spending time, you understand, you know, and spending time with the Paget in the forest, amongst his botanical garden that my eye was not able to identify from anything else in the forest, but very clearly he knew all of the relationships, everything that was going on there. And you just understood through time spent and how time was spent that there's a completely different conversation between the Paget and the plant. You know, very foreign to me, but the role that we give Ernesto makes it possible to start working from this conversation, and then bring it into a work. The work gets unfolded in a public program, and then we can have a conversation or a symposium about the medicinal properties of plants, the therapeutical potential of hallucinogenics, and what this means for the legal system. Right? This is, and I think this is the space that art can do. It can take things so seriously that we then can imagine a future, right? That we then work to make possible, right? I think that this is the kind of speculative space that a lot of science has lost, right? Because a lot of science was like that since 65 years. They were talking about the black hole, which was an idea. No one could prove the black hole for 65 years, but everybody was talking about it, and boom, 65 years later, there's the black hole, right? It's like it's a very speculative thing as well, which now with the remuneration of academics, with the remuneration of research and peer review and all of that, makes it more and more difficult to work in this space.
Right. I mean, I think it's also a kind of fine line of methodology in terms of also what might become relatively exploitative towards a situation or a community versus what actually really, empowers, let's say, through whatever form. And then maybe I know I have to be very quick. To you, Pedro, really also as an artist, right? Like, because you also showed how much you're working in Brazil, also in terms of different contexts, different communities. I guess also in the work together, also together with, again, people from different disciplines. I assume also scientists or policymakers. I wonder, what are the methodologies for working? And also, there was something that I found quite interesting that in a conversation with Maria Theresa Alves, we were talking about, which maybe then leads me to a question to you, which was also how, once an artist, let's say, makes a work inspired or in conversation with a community, that work then sort of enters the sphere of art and the art market and art distribution. Is any economy or surplus value that the work produces, does any of that actually go back to the community? Because as I was discussing with Maria Theresa, and I know there's other artists out there that actually decide programmatically to actually, think about how that can go back to them. And so this would be then a question to, what type of contracts even are done then between artists and community, legal or just in terms of faith and social contracts?
No, I agree. I think absolutely, like, how do you think about the revenue that you make in selling work or if you do sell work, and how does that go back to the people you're working with? Also, I mean, I think what you were saying about nature is key, because to me, I mean, there's always been many natures, and so even like a Marxist analysis, there's always even that perspective with Marx about labor and nature as like the beginning and the end of production cycle. That's a very specific imagination of what nature is. And like Maria was saying, there is much more out there that has different answers. On one hand, I feel a bit divided, because on one hand, I've engaging with these kind of conversations for the last few years, I feel on the one hand, really just wanting to have very practical conversations about economics mostly, and again, like how distribution happens, and solutions like Kate, you were saying, especially being here at Basel, like waste, packaging, etc. So on one hand, that kind of like real frustration with thematic, let's say, conversations about climate or ecology, and just being like, for example, I just feel very, I do understand why so many artists are looking at human, non-human kind of relations, materiality, other kind of material worlds, and it's really imaginative work, but I would really like to see much more of an engagement in practices with how do artists intervene in the very concrete kind of material agreements that are being made. On the one hand, I feel this. On the other hand, I feel the need to compensate for, like you were saying, the imagination of other possibilities and other kind of worlds that we can inhabit. Yeah. Because otherwise, if you're just on one side of the, one solution won't work, right?
I guess it means also loss of losing some privileges, right? I mean, as in Kate's talk, like what do we give up in a sense, economically, in terms of fees, in terms of taking 15 hours to travel by train instead of 2 hours by airplane? Can we travel less? Can we consume less? Can we redistribute our own wealth? Which I really liked in your presentation.
Yeah, I mean, a recent film by Ben Rivers, a filmmaker I work with, he made a film called Slow Action, and there was one scene set in Vanuatu in the Pacific, and the images are shocking when you see the situation, the devastation that climate change has caused there. Beaches, we've all seen the images, especially now on social media, beaches full of plastic, no way of recycling it. And the worst thing of all, sea levels rising there. They're the victims of our carbon footprint. In some ways, the poorer you are and the smaller your carbon footprint, the less debt you have to the planet. And I have come across a project recently, again, from this artist that I've met recently who's concentrating on research. He's just produced a set of works he's using the money to just create a small machine actually for Tonga, which is to gather up all the plastic waste on the island, which they don't have the facilities to get rid of, turn them into plastic beams for agriculture, because at the moment they're being sold timber. You know, but they have no choice. They're being sold timber, which rots very quickly in their environment. So now they have a way with this really simple machine. I mean, this machine costs £3,000 to make. You know, simple stories like this that can make such a difference to communities. I think artists taking that step forward and turning their ideas into action is really something exciting that we can look forward to. And yeah, I hope I've answered the question.
Yes. Are there questions in the audience? Many. That's good.
Hello. So I'm not sure whether I can formulate a question. I'll just make a comment. With regards to your point about the dominance of Western culture and just how I think that Western culture has infiltrated and kind of their system of relating to nature has been so dominant that I think visibility in terms of what the artist just next to you is really important. So having this space and providing a place for these other models to be understood, and maybe so that we can have different ways of relating to the environment and ecology is important. And so thank you to the artist for this presentation. And it's one way for me to become familiar with these other ways of thinking. And then I also wanted to thank the gallerist, because I think another capacity that Western culture could really develop and pursue further is its capacity for auto-critique. Because I know the filmmaker mentioned that he doesn't like the term global warming because it's kind of a catch-all phrase to designate the climatic regime we're living in. But it's also, I think it's important to have an emphasis on the global nature of these our way of relating to the environment, and also have an emphasis on on the impact that our way of living has, and the breadth of the consequences. And So what was my point? Anyway, so my point being, I really appreciated this talk. And Victoire, sorry, do you want to say something? Okay, sorry. Thank you. I don't know.
Thank you. Anybody wants to respond? Maybe you, Pedro, want to? No, I don't know.
No, I mean, we can use global warming. It's fine. It's just a bit...
Okay.
We have to wrap it up.
Okay. This went so quick. That's a good sign, right?
Quick. I have so much things to say.
Thank you. We're going to continue it, and we're going to have a podcast later. And thank you so much for being here and for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.